All right. Hello once again. Thanks for coming, everybody. We have another Green Living seminar presentation tonight. You all know me, Elena Traister, Professor of Environmental Studies here at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. And these Green Living seminars this semester are organized around the theme Greening the City. They're all free and open to the public. They take place on Wednesdays at 5:30 here in the Feigenbaum Center for Science and Innovation, room 121. If you would like to take a look at the schedule and links to recordings of prior presentations, you can find them at www.mcla.edu/greenliving, one word. Today's presentation, as always, will last for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes at the end for Q&A. So remember your questions. And before I turn it over to tonight's speaker, I want to let you know that next week, Wednesday, March 9th, we'll be hearing from Dr. Susanna Lerman. She's also presented in the past at this series, and we like her so much, we wanted to bring her back. She's a research ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service, and she'll be presenting a lecture titled Residential Landscaping to Support Pollinators. Today's presentation on community strategies for addressing the plastic pollution crisis will be given by David Sayer of Beyond Plastics and Sustainable Saratoga. We're really glad you're here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Elena. Good evening, everyone. We're starting right on time, 5:32. Okay. Congratulations for attending this session. The topic of plastic pollution, like climate change, is a hyper problem, a meta problem. It's so large that many are overwhelmed and even anxious about our future. So by joining us here, you are one of the brave, someone who wants to confront and examine our relationship with plastic. And I will reward your bravery with this promise that you will learn something new tonight about plastic pollution. Sorry. Or a new idea on how to confront it where you live. Today also, it happens to be an historic day. This picture, if you can't tell, is a giant spigot or tap, which is spewing thousands upon thousands of single-use plastics. The pic is from the United Nations Environmental Assembly meeting taking place this week, today actually, in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, where negotiating committees are beginning the process of creating a global plastic treaty. And if I have time at the end, I'll read you a headline that I grabbed before coming here today. So my name is David Sayer, and I'm here tonight as a concerned citizen and as a graduate of the Beyond Plastics course at Bennington College, taught by Judith Enck. Since taking the Beyond Plastics course in 2020, I've been helping Judith and her team organize the hundreds of alumni she has taught and who are dedicated to Beyond Plastics' mission, which is to reduce plastic pollution everywhere. I work in the IT field by day, but I put much of my spare pandemic time into serving as community manager for the Beyond Plastics Activist Network. And I'm here today because I'm greatly alarmed by what I've learned through Beyond Plastics, as well as my own self-study, much of which I have put online at that bottom link, which is a wiki site covering all aspects of the plastic pollution crisis. And as you can see from my picture, I also do environmental remediation of plastic, which is to say, I pick trash. I'm sometimes joined by members of my local sustainability organization, Sustainable Saratoga, but often I'm a lone trash vigilante. And while it feels great to clean up and try to restore nature, I'll be the first to tell you that it's a false solution to the plastic pollution crisis. The title of my talk is Community Strategies for Addressing the Plastic Pollution Crisis. And I understand that this is a Green Living series. So right away we have a quandary. Green living to most implies individual or lifestyle choices. And while personal choices can certainly change your plastic and carbon footprint, our consumer choice, our individual responsibility, is also a false solution. I know from speaking to Professor Traister that you've discussed the role of individual behavior pertaining to the global environmental problems, and particularly the work of Elizabeth DeSombre at Wellesley College, who quickly shoots down the notion that individuals can make a dent in global environmental problems when those problems are systemic and entrenched. Dr. Dispersal says that what is needed are new systems and structures, incentives, new routines, which makes sense to most individuals and thereby influence much larger groups. And I will be echoing that sentiment when I offer community actions in just a few minutes. So to kick us off, I know that many of you may be more aware than most regarding plastic pollution, and that's great. But I'm going to throw some recent news at you, and if you've heard it all, then I want to see you raise your hand at the end so I can shake it. I'm going to leave this under my nose if that's okay, just as I'm wrestling with it. All right. So did you know that microplastics and nanoplastics are in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the rain that falls, and even the snowflakes we catch on our tongues? Did you know that plastic is everywhere on the globe, from the highest slopes of Mount Everest to our most remote deserts, and even to the bottom of the Mariana Trench? So in one lifetime, my lifetime more or less, humans have coated the planet with a fine layer of permanent microplastics. And did you know that in less than a decade, by 2030, our plastic pollution will likely double? And did you know that tires are a chief source of microplastics, or that the sea is even spraying its microplastics back into the atmosphere? And if you can't see some of these numbers, here's tires with 84% of tire and braking emissions, and then sea spray contributing 11%. This was a great piece of work done by one of our alumni under Dr. Janice Brady. And did you know that microplastic runoff can carry persistent organic pollutants such as 6-ppd-quinone, a chemical which leaches into the environment and was recently discovered to be lethal to salmon and perhaps other creatures? The New York Times covered the discovery in this article, how scientists tracked down a mass killer, and it's some of the best crime reporting you'll ever read. And did you know that plastic can function as an ecosystem or life raft for invasive species and microorganisms, allowing diseases and parasites to be introduced across continents? And there's a whole new sphere of science studying this ecosystem, aka the plastosphere. And did you know that plankton, marine microorganisms, are eating microplastic? These tiny Antarctic collembolans are at the bottom of the food chain, which makes nearly every other species dependent on them as a food source. And now they are introducing microplastics into that food chain. And I'm not a scientist, but that can't be good. So brace yourselves, as you can see where this is going. Plastic isn't only found in marine life. In January 2021, the first evidence of microplastics in human placenta was discovered on both maternal and fetal sides. So that can't be good either. Especially since, as you'll see in that bottom bullet, microplastics aren't inert. They carry substances or chemicals which could affect human health and development. These substances are called EDCs, or endocrine disrupting chemicals, because they interfere with hormone action in our bodies. And they've been linked to many adverse health outcomes, including cancer, reproductive impairment, metabolic diseases and disorders, cognitive impairment, and falling sperm rates. And that last one, falling sperm rates, poses especially dire consequences for the human race, as Dr. Shauna Swan argues in her recent book, Countdown. And just this month, February 4th, 2022, a report out of Israel found that microplastics not only leach toxins, but they can pick up additional persistent organic pollutants, acting like magnets, concentrating them in the body and depositing those pollutants where they don't belong, obviously. A phenomenon called joint toxicity. Baby feces, plastic is here too. Now, why is the baby bigger than the adult here? Because in this study published September of 21, 6 New York State infants all had levels of PET in their stool, and 3 newborns also had microplastics in their first stool, the meconium. The infant stool contained, on average, more than 10 times higher PET concentrations than that of adults. So it's thought that infants could be exposed to higher levels of microplastics because of their use of bottles, teethers, and toys. So the PET you see on there, that's the polyethylene terephthalate, the number one plastic, and PC is polycarbonate. A 2019 study estimated that a third of plastic waste leaks into the environment. It's estimated that 50 million tons of plastic enter the oceans every year, and with that plastic becoming microplastic, entering the food chain, riding up the food chain, it may not surprise you that the average person ingests a credit card's worth of microplastic each week. I made that meme myself, thanks. And the chemical additives in plastics also leach into the environment, or in some cases, our food and bodies. Now, hopefully everyone here picked up some news you can use from among those, and if you knew it all, then please raise your hand because I'd like to shake it. Oh, but one more. This one from December 2021, a pre-publication of the report Reckoning with the U.S. Role in Global Ocean Plastic Waste from the National Academies of Sciences tried to set the record straight on which nations were most responsible. And you can probably guess the result. The committee was able to conclude that while only 4.3% of the world's population lives in the US, that's 4.3 in the US, our nation was the top generator of plastic waste, producing 42 million metric tons with per person plastic waste generation at 287 pounds annually. But here's some good news to punctuate these discoveries. There is broad popular belief that plastic pollution, particularly marine pollution, needs to be addressed globally, even more so than climate change. The marine protection NGO Oceana surveyed 1,000 American voters and found broad bipartisan support, 81% actually, support policies that reduce single-use plastic at a local, state, and national level. National Geographic did another. They asked 2,000 American adults what big planet-helping changes they'd like to see. And among the options listed, the top was phasing out plastics to clean up waterways. So here's the real reason I'm here today. If you take one message away from this evening, I only want you to know and champion this message. As common sense will tell you, and as the Reckoning report also concluded, the number one recommendation is to reduce plastic production. It's massively important that we turn off the tap, and by that we mean the plastic production tap. But what is that tap? Where is the tap? The tap is the fossil fuel industry, because 99%, effectively all, are manufactured from fossil fuels. More specifically, most plastics manufactured in the US come from ethane, which is a cheap byproduct of hydrofracking, fracking. And to catch you up, the US is now, since 2018, the largest producer of oil and gas in the world, and largely due to the shale revolution and fracking operations in Texas, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, Colorado. So this reality should reframe how people think of the plastic crisis. It means that plastic is a climate change issue as it totally relies on fossil fuels. It means that plastic reduction can help us meet that 1.5 degree global warming target. Fossil fuels are integral to the production of plastics, but if one looks beyond just the production phase, you'll see that plastic pollutes at every stage in its life cycle. From extraction to transportation and processing, to the ethane cracker nurdle production, to exporting, importing, then onto its useful and brief life in the hands of a consumer before the inevitable disposition to landfill, incineration, or unmanaged waste. And collectively, these life cycle phases produce enough greenhouse gas emission that if the plastic industry were a country, it would be the world's 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gases, 1.7 gigatons to be exact. And if we compare plastics to an industry, say aviation, plastics contribute twice as many emissions to climate change as the aviation industry. So when your friends or colleagues ask, what has plastic got to do with climate change? The answer is a lot. So let's now compare to the coal industry. For those of you who already follow Beyond Plastics, You hopefully heard about this report, The New Coal, which dropped in October of 2021. It conservatively estimates the carbon footprint of the US plastics industry and compares its emissions to that of coal. And it found that plastic is catching up to coal emissions rapidly, and that plastic is on pace to exceed US coal emissions by 2030. And that should be a stark realization for many, because plastic is effectively canceling any hard-won gains that were achieved through coal plant decommissioning. Because remarkably, 65% of coal plants have been retired in the US. And now we're seeing a petrochemical build-out stepping in to fill its shoes. So we don't have time to summarize all of the report's findings from the new coal, but it examines 10 different stages of plastic production and their impacts, measured in CO2 equivalents. And some of these may surprise you, such as the emissions and off-gassing of foamed plastic insulation, for example, which you can read about in the report. But the one finding that landed hardest for me is this one, that more than 90% of the climate pollution that the plastic industry reports, which they have to do to the EPA, occurs in 18 communities, just 18 communities. And you can see that they're mostly in Texas and Louisiana. And more is coming. With the surge of ethane availability, there's an expected build-out of ethane crackers, mostly proposed in Texas, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. But the newest coming soon is Royal Dutch Shell's Appalachia facility. This is the unfinished Shell ethane cracker on the Ohio River in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, the first in the Appalachian region. And the ACC, the American Chemistry Council, projects that the region, which sits on the Marcellus and Utica shale basins, could support up to 5 of these ethane crackers. So once completed, this one facility will pump out 18 million tons of virgin PET annually. Virgin plastic production itself is expected to quadruple by 2050 if unimpeded. Quadruple by 2050. By the way, the US is already home to about 40% of global ethane-based petrochemical production. So this top line, Plan A, is how most of us think of fossil fuels, as energy's lifeblood, feeding transportation and heavy industry. But as renewable energy becomes more affordable and widely used, and electric cars are adopted, the demand for fossil fuels is falling. Plastic is now a primary growth market for the oil and gas industry, a bankable Plan B, if you will. The effects of plastic on climate and biodiversity cannot be ignored. The 2019 bushfires in Australia, 2019 to 2020, were greatly worsened by climate change, killed an estimated 1 billion animals. The extraction of natural gas for plastics certainly contributes, with methane emission and leakage being a primary concern, as it's 25 times more impactful or harmful than CO2. Plastics also off-gas. They release emissions as they break down into microplastics in waterways and landfills, or when they are burned in incinerators, which is increasingly often. So it's not a stretch to say that the figurative flood of plastics is contributing to actual floods. And that is what we are seeing now. More intense storms mean more flooding, and sadly, the populations who contribute the least to the problem are often the most affected and have the fewest resources to recover. And I'll leave these pictures up for a few seconds. Plastic pollution readily kills wildlife, either by ingestion or entanglement. More than 2,400 marine species have been documented ingesting plastic, including over 90% of seabirds. Albatross, such as the one shown here, mistake colored plastic for shrimp. The plastic fills their stomachs, and they tragically starve to death. And then, get this, I never thought about this, but the plastic there remains and can go on to kill another animal, right? It's not going anywhere. It's not dying, so. But Since 1950, the world has produced nearly 10 billion tons of plastic, more than half of which was produced in the last 15 years. So after 2004, half of the world's plastic. And less than 9% of that plastic has been recycled. And of that, only 2% was effectively recycled. The rest was downcycled into a less valuable product and eventually disposed of. Roughly 12% has been incinerated. So what is not still in use is in landfills or the environment. Plastic waste is an international social and environmental issue. Much of the global north ships their waste to be dumped on the global south, where it causes immense problems. In these regions, people can earn small amounts of money by picking through the waste for valuable recyclables, but much of this plastic has no value. It is comprised mostly of film plastic, mixed materials, or it is contaminated. The US now produces nearly 40 million tons of plastic every year and is tied with Australia for generating the most plastic waste per capita. 40% of new plastic is destined for single use, such as the plastic shown here. Sometimes I throw news clips in here. So there's an October update. There's a report in environmental pollution that draws connections between the phthalates in packaging. So those are the plasticizers that are added to plastic, saying that they may contribute to over 100,000 US deaths a year. 100,000 just in the US, mostly in older Americans. The loss of life cost estimate is between $40 to $47 billion per year, according to a study. So let's talk about this other aspect of plastic production. It has a human impact as well that's often unseen and needs to be addressed as an environmental justice and environmental racism issue. I mentioned the 18 communities earlier. The manufacturing infrastructure is often cited in low income and Black, brown, and indigenous communities, contributing to disproportionate health problems in those communities, and certainly a lower quality of life. Maybe you've heard of Rise St. James. They're a community-based environmental group in St. James Parish, Louisiana. And they're fighting Formosa Plastics, which is based in Taiwan and which intends to build the largest plastics manufacturing plant in the US on 2,500 acres in an historically Black community that is already affected by heavy industry, including Marathon and Valero. Not only is the Formosa site, which is a former sugarcane plantation, located on hundreds of acres of imperiled wetlands, it also contains the graves of people who were enslaved and whose descendants are alive today. So here, the Rise St. James organization are honoring the graves of those in a Juneteenth celebration, actually. If constructed, the Formosa St. James plant will be the largest new source of greenhouse gas emissions in the nation. The Biden administration announced they will now require a full environmental impact study. So that's a victory. But what we really need to do, again, is to establish a moratorium, to turn off the tap, establish a moratorium on new ethane cracker facilities. That is how we turn off the tap and reduce virgin plastic production. And to do that, policy is needed. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, BFFPPA, you can practice saying it. The BFFPPA is a federal bill aimed at reducing single-use disposable plastics, protecting frontline communities, and expanding reuse and refill models to supplant plastic packaging. So there's a lot on this slide, but the BFFPPA was reintroduced in 2021 and attacks the problem on many fronts, including bans on single-use products and bags, a national container refund program, post-consumer content requirements for packaging, a standardized labeling system for packaging, waste and export prohibitions, and infrastructure and recycling program investments. So this is what meaningful change looks like. So take a good look. Perhaps the UNEA Global Plastic Treaty that I mentioned earlier will hit upon many of these critical needs. And local legislation, of course, is important to reduce single-use plastics. Beyond Plastics offers a model bill that local governments can use to target some of the most common litter items, including plastic bags, polystyrene foam, intentional balloon releases, those plastic splash guards, stirrers, and straws. So anyone who is interested in this sample bill can download it and bring it to your local representative. Beyond Plastics also offers a guide to introducing and passing this model law. So now for some story time. I'm going to share stories of 3 groups that recently presented to our Beyond Plastics Activists Network. Real people working in their own communities. This is Dave Dobler, a new friend and hero of ours at Beyond Plastics. As a kayaker and founder of volunteercleanup.org, Dave could see what plastic pollution was doing to Biscayne Bay and Miami Beach. And he had an insight regarding the potential source, as Miami Beach has, like many institutions or destinations and campuses, a beverage pouring contract for the city's concessions and music venues. Miami Beach's was with Coca-Cola. These are multi-year contracts, so Dave had to bide his time waiting for Coke's end of contract, but in that time helped create a plastic-free Miami Beach initiative and build a case against single-use plastic with city government creating a new contract for Coke stipulating that aluminum containers must replace the standard plastic ones. And Coke could not or would not comply. So competitors then began to circle. Pepsi entered the conversation, as did some alternative water providers. The outcome, the contract is now in limbo. They're going month to month and holding Coke's feet to the fire, demonstrating the kind of political will that is rare, but which will hopefully become more prevalent now that plastic's impacts are better understood. So I'm really proud of Dave. This is an amazing David versus Goliath story and shows what's possible when you have executive and community support. Similarly, State University of New York, SUNY New Paltz campus, their campus was inspired by Beyond Plastics' own Judith Enck, our president and founder, to launch their own aluminum can initiative, in this case, renegotiating vending machine contracts. These contracts are also multi-year, so require some anticipation, but the idea caught on and was championed by students as well as the Sustainability Office. For years, New Paltz wasn't even selling bottled water to students, and the students were complaining. With their new contract and bottled water in cans, there are no gripes, and the school has put in dozens of hydration stations to encourage refilling. Nor is there any pushback from students regarding the new economics. The new cans are smaller than the 20-ounce plastic bottles that they replace. So the price per unit has gone down, even if the price per ounce has gone up. And also the school is reaping less from the contract's remuneration component because these contracts have a payback to the institutions, and schools will often use that revenue toward their educational mission. But here too, there was enough executive board support to do the right and sustainable thing and make this incremental change. And here's that student-led team, real people, no capes needed. And we hear that the ripples of this effort, are expanding outward, and that the Board of Trustees for the entire SUNY system is creating a single-use plastics task force. So that's great news. Another campus, University of California system. Their campuses are phasing out single-use plastics by 2023, so just around the corner, as part of their bold commitment to achieve zero waste to landfill. And their policy is actually also on our site. It's available for download at beyondplastics.org. Have you heard of Buy Nothing? Buy Nothing is an app and a movement recently featured in the New York Times. It was founded by 2 women in Washington State, Liesl and Rebecca, who for many years facilitated these large-scale community yard sales, swap meets, championing reuse and repurposing. Obviously, that's a local model, but they have created a large Facebook movement and also this app that aims to build the same type of gifting economy or community anywhere. And what we love about Buy Nothing is that it focuses on the first 2 R's, reduce and reuse, the most important. That is a hierarchy, by the way, reduce, reuse, recycle. And Remember, reduction works 100% of the time and usually costs nothing. It's the most effective of the 3 R's. So when we do it, it also sends a message back upstream. So some additional community actions that are on the Beyond Plastics website right now. Some are individual actions, but if you can team up with friends or family, then you can amplify your results and get noticed. So for example, COVID-related, if your store hasn't yet gone back to reusables and refillables, now's the time to remind them. You could ask your store to drop single-use plastics, styrofoam. New York State just had a EPS, expanded polystyrene ban. So helping to police that would be helpful. And remember, you're the customer, you're always right. So tell the 3 biggest plastic, or you could also tell the 3 biggest plastic polluters to stop. I mentioned Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Nestle Waters. Now they've changed, they've rebranded in the North America region, they're Blue Triton now. So you can get on their backs. Skip the stuff. Good hashtag and an actual bill. A really simple action for restaurants and food delivery services where utensil packs are offered by request only. This was nearly adopted in New York City just this quarter. It's still very close. But if you're still getting that in your orders and you don't need it, please let your retailer know. So also for campuses on the Beyond Plastics site, lots of resources. We have some toolkits, a plastic-free campus manual. The organization Surfrider, they have a Rise Above Plastic Activist toolkit. There's more info on the vending machine campaign. There's the model bill that I mentioned, which will help you target 6 of the most common sources for single-use plastic pollution. And again, those are plastic bags, plastic straws, stirrers, the splash guards, polystyrene foam, and balloon releases. Here's one you may not have thought of. Artificial turf. It's an action which can be highly visible and highly educational for communities because synthetic turf playing fields have 20 to 30 tons of virgin plastic fibers in them, which are ballasted by 200 to 300 tons of infill material. So that's often ground tires, even manufacturing waste, sometimes called Nike grind. The fields themselves are hot and toxin-laden. They're carpets, and they cover hundreds of thousands of acres of formerly vegetated land. They are a double whammy for the climate, taking something good for climate and stormwater, which is grass, and replacing it with something that superficially looks and acts similar, but actually is the climate and health opposite. They're hotter than asphalt and create heat islands and shed microplastics plus related toxins, including PFAS. We haven't talked about PFAS yet. But they also replace cooling and oxygenating grass and filtering soil. And their disposal is, as you can see, these rolls are getting dumped and piled, not landfilled. They're not going anywhere. So that's a mess. The state of Maryland is actually reviewing a bill right now where they are trying to require producers of synthetic turf and infill to track and report the chain of custody of these materials to the Department of the Environment, just to see where that stuff is going. I have a turf across the street from my house, and it only lasts 8 to 10 years, and they have to do this all over again. And even the industry is saying that they don't recycle. Cleanups. Hey, for me, this was kind of a gateway drug or activity. As my friend Dave Dobler, who heads up the City of Miami Beach Cleanup says, you'll see things you can't unsee. It's a springboard for activism. It can awaken communities to the threats posed by plastics. It can also engage our youth. And while I said that it may be a false solution since they don't directly reduce plastic production, cleanups can be used to influence, or I can even say shame, plastic producers through data. So anyone, group or individual, can perform a brand audit. Has anyone ever heard of a brand audit? This is done by inventorying the trash piece by piece and auditing the cleanup results so that the most common brands or producers or parent companies can be identified. And this is exactly what the Break Free from Plastic, an organization, does annually with their global brand audit, which they published 2021 and Coke always comes out at the top. I'll get to them in a second. Other apps, Literati, if you've heard of Literati, and Trash Blitz can be used to capture this data and even gamify the activity so that groups or individuals in a given area can map their collective impact, but also furnish the data up to producers and or a global coalition such as Break Free from Plastic. You can create challenges on these. There's even AI that helps you categorize the trash. So it's kind of a citizen science activity. And you can quantify your impact and be part of that global brand audit as well. Something else that's not so much an action as a skill, and that is what I'll call recognizing greenwashing. I think we probably all know greenwashing when we see it on labels, 100% recycled on something. But have a critical eye for things like this. This is also recent, February. Coca-Cola announced their effort to get to 25% reusable packaging by 2030. And as that news broke, you could hear smatterings of applause on social media. So is this greenwashing? So my commentary, corporate pledges as intentions are laudable, but they aren't enforceable. And because their time horizon is 3-5 years or more, these pledges kind of assuage consumer concerns, assuring us that things are being done imminently and that the industry is innovating and can regulate itself. And yet the circular system they're innovating on is built on plastic, a material which recycles poorly, it pollutes across its life cycle, and invites toxins. And that's before it has 50% post-consumer resins. So even Coke's aspirational goal is not good enough. But these moves also signal that plastic reduction is a new battlefield where brands must defend their actions or non-actions. And we have to remind them that words are not enough. Speaking of words, I'll share this text from Coca-Cola's website, which underscores the tenuous fragility of these pledges. I don't expect you to read it, but here are, I counted 33 clauses, different risks or likelihoods that might cause Coca-Cola to miss the mark with regard to their forward-looking pledge. Included are things such as inflationary pressures, new taxes, product safety concerns, which to me sounds like an indirect swipe at glass, obesity, failure to digitize, even bad weather and climate change are named. So pretty much anything that can and will happen, right? So we can see, so we cannot ease up on legislation in the face of what might appear to be producer enlightenment. Some unsolicited organizing advice, if hopefully many of you will be inspired to organize if you aren't already. Some quick tips from Beyond Plastics. So take friends, always go as a group when meeting your representatives, ask for constituent meetings, write letters and tweet, be visible. Letters to the editor are Judith Enk's weapon of choice. Join forces with the climate change groups. So they may be more visible, but remember that plastic reduction has as much support as climate legislation, or more. And don't be on the fringe, right? Plastic is a mainstream issue. It's not just straws or litter or recycling. And make it urgent. Like the climate race, we can't postpone action. Lives are in the balance, communities are paying the cost, and the petrochemical infrastructure is growing rapidly. So in the words of Bill McKibben, winning slowly is losing. And if you're going to make suggestions to businesses, don't harass. So when you're speaking to legislators or business owners, don't simply complain or condemn, bring a solution if you can. Often you have to do the homework yourselves. Other things we can do, join a local sustainability group, join Beyond Plastics. We're supporting local groups and affiliate organizations who want to add a plastic pollution competency. You can contribute to a brand audit, donate to an air or water or environmental justice organization, since plastic is fundamentally contributing to those issues. Personal lifestyle changes are certainly the easiest and fastest way to get started. And if your change influences a whole household or extended family, then you can amplify your impact that way. One plastic reducing method we recommend, start by looking at the plastic that is most common in your daily life. Maybe do a switch out, a substitute. Maybe it's K-cups or cling wrap or water bottles. In our house, we used a lot of laundry detergent, large plastic jugs, and now we use dissolving laundry strips. I think about one of our activists, Eve Schaub, who tried to go a day without touching plastic. And that could be a way that you work on your reduction. Whatever, the first piece of plastic you touch in the morning, work on replacing that. So, in summary, we must reduce plastics at the source. Plastics are a fossil fuel product, and while some plastics can truly be life-giving, the vast majority are single-use. Disposable plastic is flawed by design. It gets used momentarily and then is left to persist in the environment for centuries. The climate impacts are now well understood, and we see the roadmap that the petrochemical industry would have us follow. There are lesser understood human health risks and reproductive impacts, not to mention wildlife and biodiversity impacts. The list goes on, and more unintended consequences are surfacing every day. So let today be the day you decide to resist and add your voice to the cause. Here are Beyond Plastics social media channels if you want to connect with us. We have our main accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We actually have 2 Twitter accounts. We created that new activist network handle, which is currently running a Rethink Packaging campaign. So if you're on Twitter, please, Beyond Plast Act. That's kind of shortened because of the Twitter limitation, Beyond Plast Act. I maintain my own wiki. You can get, it was that same link as before, but this is a shortener, bit.ly/plasticwiki. And I put latest news and kind of break everything down, categorize it. It's my second brain for plastics, which you need just to, because like I said, it's a hyper and very highly interconnected topic. So I hope this helped you navigate the topic, that you found the presentation worthy of your time, and that you're inspired to go beyond plastics. So thank you. Oh, before, I also promised to share a headline. So today, March 2, 2022, heads of state, ministers of environment, and other representatives from 175 nations endorsed a historic resolution at the United Nations Environmental Assembly, UNEA 5, today in Nairobi, to end plastic pollution and forge an international legally binding agreement by 2024. The resolution addresses the full life cycle of plastic, including its production, design, and disposal. Here's a quote. Against the backdrop of geopolitical turmoil, the UN Environment Assembly shows multilateral cooperation at its best, said the president of UNEA 5 and Norway's Minister for Climate and the Environment, Espen Barth Eide. Quote, plastic pollution has grown into an epidemic. With today's resolution, we are officially on track for a cure. The resolution, based on 3 initial draft resolutions from various nations, establishes an intergovernmental negotiating committee, an INC, which will begin its work this year in 2022, with the ambition of completing a draft global legally binding agreement by the end of 2024. So very encouraging, a memorable day, and we'll have to track that and see what they can do with it and give it some teeth. So legally binding agreement is the key term that they keep squeezing in there. Okay, so how did I do on time? I've got quarter after. Happy to take any questions or, yep, thanks.